It was a deal no one could have ever anticipated. A young woman, barely 19, was sold to a billionaire, a man who could have anyone he wanted but sought her for reasons unknown to her. Her name was Alyssa, and her world had collapsed around her when her father had agreed to the terms of a contract that would change her life forever. Alyssa had always lived in a modest world. Her father was a struggling businessman, barely scraping by. When her father's company went under, drowning in debt, her family's life spiraled into chaos. Desperation led her father to make an agreement with one of the wealthiest men in the world, Alexander Westbrook, the billionaire CEO of Westbrook Enterprises. The contract was simple: Alyssa would become Alexander's wife in exchange for a sum of money that would clear the debt and secure her family's future. Her father had sold her, in every sense of the word. Alyssa had pleaded with her father, tried to reason with him, but it was futile. Her protests fell on deaf ears. He had made the choice, and now it was hers to bear. Alexander Westbrook, a man known for his coldness and cruelty, was to be her husband. She was no more than a pawn in a world of luxury and power she would never have chosen for herself. Her wedding day arrived with the same finality as the contract she had signed. She wore the most beautiful gown money could buy, a white satin dress that shimmered under the lights. Her father stood proudly beside her, his face filled with a mixture of guilt and relief. He had made the right decision for the family, he kept telling himself. But Alyssa was a virgin, innocent in the ways of love and desire. She had always dreamed of a romantic, loving marriage, not this cold transaction. As she walked down the aisle, her heart felt as though it was being torn from her chest. She couldn't look at Alexander, couldn't bear the thought of becoming his possession. Alexander stood at the altar, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity she couldn't understand. His tall, imposing figure towered over her, his sharp jawline and dark eyes reflecting no warmth. He was a man of few words, a man who had never been interested in love or affection. To him, Alyssa was nothing more than a means to an end. Their vows were exchanged, the ceremony was brief, and then they were married. As they left the church and drove to the mansion that would now be her prison, Alyssa tried to block out the thoughts that consumed her. This was her reality now. She would be expected to submit, to follow his commands, to be the wife of a man who saw her only as a transaction. The mansion loomed ahead, dark and cold as they arrived. The grand doors opened, and the staff silently watched as the newlyweds entered. Alyssa was led to her new room, a massive suite that felt more like a gilded cage than a sanctuary. Alexander didn't speak to her as he entered, his footsteps heavy on the marble floors. She stood frozen, unsure of what to do. Her heart raced, and her hands trembled. This wasn't how she had imagined her wedding night. There would be no romance, no passion, only duty. As he turned to face her, the tension in the air was thick. Alexander's dark eyes studied her, and for a moment, Alyssa felt a flicker of something, an emotion she couldn't place. But before she could process it, he moved toward her. "Take off your dress," he ordered. Alyssa flinched at the command. She had been taught that marriage was a sacred union, an act of love. But here, it felt cold and transactional. She hesitated for a moment before slowly starting to undress, her hands shaking. She had never been touched by anyone, never been in the arms of a man. This night, she had been told, would be her initiation into a new world, but it was nothing like the fantasy she had once envisioned. Alexander stood still, watching her with a gaze that felt like it was burning into her skin. He didn't say a word, but his eyes followed every movement as she slowly disrobed, feeling both exposed and humiliated. When she was finally bare before him, she looked down, unable to meet his gaze. She was a virgin, unmarked by anyone but herself. The thought of him touching her, claiming her, made her stomach turn. But then, unexpectedly, Alexander reached out. His hands were gentle as they cupped her face, lifting her chin so she had no choice but to look at him. His eyes were different now, no longer cold, no longer calculating. There was something softer, something vulnerable in them. Alyssa, he said, his voice hoarse and low. I'm not going to hurt you. The words shocked her. She had expected him to be ruthless, cold, a man who only cared about himself. But instead, he was speaking to her with a tenderness she had never anticipated. She swallowed hard, trying to understand what was happening. I'm not like what you think I am, he continued, his thumb gently brushing her cheek. This is not just about the contract. It's not about what I paid for. I never thought I would say this, but I want to know you, Alyssa. I want to understand you. Alyssa's heart raced, her mind whirling. She didn't know if she could trust him, if this was just a fleeting moment of weakness or if there was something more to his words. The man she had once seen as her captor, the one who had bought her as though she were nothing more than an object, was now showing signs of something else. She felt the tension between them shift, but she didn't know what it meant. Without another word, Alexander leaned down and kissed her tentatively at first, as though he, too, was unsure of what he was feeling. But then, as the kiss deepened, something in Alyssa changed. Her body responded in ways she hadn't anticipated. She could feel his warmth, his strength, and his tenderness all at once, and the walls she had built around her heart began to crumble. He pulled back slightly, his forehead resting against hers. I never thought I could feel this way, he whispered. But I do. Alyssa's breath caught in her throat. Feel what? Love, he replied softly. I never thought I could love you, but I think I might. The word sent a shock through her. Love. The word she had never imagined coming from him. For a moment, she couldn't breathe, couldn't think. This was the man who had bought her, the man who had seen her as nothing more than a transaction. And yet, now he was telling her he loved her. She wanted to believe him, but how could she? How could she believe that this man, who had treated her like property, could suddenly feel something as real as love? But as the night unfolded, Alyssa realized that she, too, had started to feel something she couldn't explain. Despite everything, despite the way their marriage had started, she couldn't deny the connection between them. Perhaps it wasn't love at first sight, but it was something more than either of them had anticipated. And for the first time, Alyssa allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of her story. It could be the beginning of something completely unexpected. In the days that followed, Alexander's behavior continued to surprise her. He was no longer the cold, distant man who had bought her like a commodity. Instead, he began to show her affection in ways she hadn't expected. He would bring her flowers, take her out on unexpected dates, and show genuine interest in her thoughts and feelings. It was clear that the man who had once seen their marriage as nothing more than a business arrangement was now deeply invested in her well-being. And Alyssa, despite the scars of their past, began to open her heart to him. But it wasn't easy. Trust had to be rebuilt, and love had to be earned. As the weeks turned into months, Alexander showed Alyssa that he was willing to fight for her, willing to prove that his feelings were real. And, slowly, Alyssa began to believe him. She started to see him not as the man who had bought her, but as the man who loved her. The walls she had built to protect herself slowly crumbled, and she allowed herself to fall in love with him in return. It wasn't the love she had imagined as a young girl. It wasn't the fairy tale she had dreamed of. But it was real. And for Alyssa, that was enough. Their marriage, born from a transaction, became a true partnership, one built on trust, respect, and love. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't easy. But it was theirs. And in the end, that was all that mattered.